What if Fast 11 just pulled the wildest move in franchise history?
Because rumors are exploding about Cristiano Ronaldo appearing in the saga,
Brian O'Connor returning, and Mr. Nobody stepping back into the shadows at the exact same time.
and if even two of those are true, this is not just another sequel.
This is a complete reset of the Fast universe. Let's start with the hook nobody saw coming, because bringing Ronaldo into Fast and Furious is not random stunt casting. It is strategic escalation.
And this franchise does not escalate unless it is preparing for something massive. Because Ronaldo is not just an athlete, he is a global icon.
And casting him would signal that Fast 11 is aiming for myth-level spectacle. Not just street racing nostalgia. Now imagine this. Ronaldo does not play himself.
He plays a high-profile international figure connected to Dante's global network. Someone untouchable, someone with influence, speed, money, and public image. And suddenly Fast is no longer about underground wars.
It is about power operating in plain sight. And that shift alone changes the stakes completely. But here is where it gets even more insane. Because while the spotlight distracts everyone with a new face, the real earthquake would be happening quietly.
Brian O'Connor returning at the exact moment the saga reaches its breaking point.
Not for nostalgia, not for a cameo,
but because Dom's world is collapsing from the inside.
And Brian is the only one who ever represented balance in that chaos. And if Brian comes back now, it would not be to race. It would not be to fight. It would be to confront.
Because the franchise has turned Dom into something larger than life, almost untouchable. And the only person who can stand in front of him without fear is Brian.
And that confrontation would be bigger than any villain. Now bring Mr. Nobody into this equation, because his absence has been louder than his presence. And when a character like that disappears without a body,
without closure, that is not a mistake, that is set up. Because Mr. Nobody represents the layer above the action, the puppeteer level.
The one who knows the systems behind the chaos. What if Mr. Nobody has been orchestrating everything from behind the curtain?
Letting Dom and Dante collide while preparing something far more controlled.
Far more calculated, because if Brian represents emotion and Ronaldo represents spectacle, Mr. Nobody represents control. And when control returns, the board changes completely. Now think about this. Three forces entering the story at once. The myth, the machine, and the mastermind. And Dom standing in the center of it, forced to choose which future this franchise takes. Escalation without limits, emotional closure,
or strategic reset. And here is the anchor that makes this theory dangerous.
What if Fast 11 is not building toward another war,
but toward exposure? Because once Mr. Nobody steps back in, secrets surface. Once Brian appears, consequences return. And once a global icon like Ronaldo enters the picture, the saga moves from underground to worldwide legitimacy.
And that combination feels less like continuation,
and more like final evolution. But the most unsettling possibility is this.
What if these returns are not meant to expand the universe,
but to compress it, to bring every layer together into one final collision, where spectacle, emotion, and control cannot coexist anymore?
And someone has to give, because once Brian stands next to Dom again,
once Mr. Nobody reveals what he has been planning, and once the world sees Fast operating on a global stage bigger than ever before, there is no going back to street races and backyard barbecues. And if that is true,
then Fast 11 is not just another chapter.
It is the moment the saga decides what it wants to be forever, or whether it is finally ready to end. Because the scariest part about all of this is not that Ronaldo might appear,
not that Brian could return, not even that Mr. Nobody is still out there.
It is that all three of those moves feel coordinated.
And Fast and Furious has never coordinated emotional, political,
and global stakes at the same time unless it was preparing for something irreversible. Think about the pattern.
Every time this franchise resets, it does it quietly first.
New alliances form before old ones collapse.
Characters re-enter before anyone explains why. And by the time the audience understands what is happening,
the board has already changed. Now imagine the moment.
Dom believes he is fighting Dante. He believes this is just another personal war.
But behind that war, Mr. Nobody has been tracking something bigger.
And Brian's return is not random timing. It is a reaction.
Almost like a contingency plan triggered when Dom crosses a line he cannot uncross. And Ronaldo's rumored appearance suddenly makes more sense in that context. Because bringing in a figure that massive shifts the world outward.
It forces the franchise into the public eye inside its own story.
meaning whatever is about to happen cannot stay underground anymore. This is where the tone changes, because Fast has always thrived on escalation, but escalation without control leads to collapse.
And that is exactly where the saga feels like it is heading. Not louder, not faster, but more exposed, and exposure changes everything, because once secrets start surfacing, once alliances start being clean, once family stops being unquestioned loyalty, the emotional core of Fast gets tested in a way it never has before. What if Brian returns and does not immediately stand beside Dom? What if Mr. Nobody reveals information that reframes everything we thought we knew? What if Ronaldo's character represents a world that no longer tolerates chaos masked as heroism? Suddenly, the saga is not about speed. It is about accountability. And that is the one direction Fast and Furious has always avoided. So if all of this converges in Fast 11,
then the real twist is not who shows up, it is who changes. Because when legends return and masterminds reappear at the same time, someone is about to lose control of the narrative. And if Dom is no longer the one driving the story, then who is? Because here is the thing nobody wants to admit.
Fast and Furious has reached the point where it cannot simply outdo itself again. It cannot just add bigger explosions, crazier physics, or another surprise villain.
Because once you go to space, once you drop cars out of planes, once you turn Dom into an unstoppable force, there is only one direction left.
Inward. And that is exactly why the timing of these possible returns feels intentional.
Because when a franchise stops escalating outward, it starts escalating emotionally.
And emotional escalation is far more dangerous than spectacle. If Ronaldo appears, he is not just there for hype.
He represents visibility, global attention. The idea that the underground world Dom operates in is no longer hidden. And once that world becomes visible, consequences follow. If Mr. Nobody returns,
he brings information, secrets, files we have never seen, operations we were never told about, and the terrifying possibility that Dom has never truly been in control of his own story. And if Brian returns at that exact moment,
he becomes the emotional trigger, the one person capable of forcing Dom to confront something he has avoided for years.
The cost of everything, because let's be honest, Fast has talked about family for a decade.
But it has rarely shown the damage that kind of loyalty causes.
And if Fast 11 wants to shock audiences, it will not do it with a stunt.
It will do it with a realization. What if Dom discovers that protecting his family has put the world in greater danger? What if Mr. Nobody reveals that every mission,
every escalation, every retaliation has been building toward a global response that Dom cannot outdrive? What if Ronaldo's character represents that response, not as a villain, but as a symbol of a world that is done playing by Dom's rules? And then Brian steps in, not to fight, not to race, but to ask the question no one else can ask. Was it worth it? That is not just tension, that is fracture, because once Dom hesitates, even for a second, the myth cracks, and once the myth cracks, the entire saga shifts tone, and here is where the real suspense begins.
Because if Fast 11 is setting up a final chapter,
it cannot just end with Dom winning again. That would mean nothing has changed. And nothing changing is the only thing more dangerous than losing. So the real possibility is this.
Fast 11 is not about who survives. It is about who evolves. Does Dom stay the unstoppable legend? Does Brian become the conscience of the story again?
Does Mr. Nobody pull the strings one last time?
Does a global figure like Ronaldo signal that the world has moved beyond street codes and into something bigger? And if all of that collides in one final arc, then the ending is not about speed. Not about revenge.
Not even about family dinners. It is about identity. Who is Dominic Toretto without war?
Who is Brian O'Connor without sacrifice?
Who is Fast and Furious without escalation? And if the franchise actually answers those questions instead of avoiding them, then Fast 11 might not just surprise fans.
It might completely redefine what this saga was building toward the entire time.
Because here is where everything becomes unstable. Not when villains attack, but when trust starts to fracture.
And Fast and Furious has always survived on one thing.
Absolute loyalty, unquestioned, unbreakable.
Almost mythic loyalty. So what happens if that loyalty cracks from the inside? Not because someone turns evil.
Not because someone switches sides for money. But because someone realizes the mission itself might be wrong. Imagine this.
Mr. Nobody returns with information that reframes everything. Proof that Dante is not the only threat.
Proof that there is a larger system responding to Dom's escalating wars, and someone on the team sees that information before Dom does. Now, the tension is not about fighting the enemy.
It is about deciding whether to tell Dom the truth, because what if protecting him means lying to him? And here is where the betrayal angle becomes dangerous.
Not loud betrayal, not a dramatic gunpoint scene,
But quiet hesitation, missed calls, unexplained disappearances. A mission that goes slightly off plan because someone chose a different objective without telling Dom. The kind of betrayal hurts more.
because it is rooted in doubt, not hatred. And now layer this on top. What if one of the major returns is actually a distraction? What if the rumors about Ronaldo's appearance are meant to shift attention inside the story itself?
A public figure used as a shield while something else moves in the dark, because Mr. Nobody has always operated 2 moves ahead. And if he comes back now, it is not to react. It is to execute something that has been in motion for years. So what if Brian's return is not just emotional timing? What if it was triggered deliberately?
Pulled back into the narrative because Mr. Nobody knew Dom would not listen to anyone else.
That means Brian is not just returning as a friend. He is returning as leverage, and that possibility changes everything. Because if Dom realizes that someone orchestrated Brian's re-entry into his life for strategic reasons,
the trust inside the team does not just crack, it shatters. Now imagine this scene. Dom standing between Brian and Mr. Nobody.
One representing heart, the other representing control.
And somewhere in the background a global shift happening that none of them can fully stop. And here is the real twist. What if the betrayal is not a single character? What if it is the realization that the entire team has been operating inside a system they never understood, that their victories were allowed,
that their enemies were selected, that their freedom was curated? Once that idea enters the story, fast is no longer just action. It becomes revelation, and revelation is the most explosive thing this franchise could deploy. Because you cannot outdrive the truth. So if Fast 11 leans into that tension, if it plants seeds of doubt,
if it uses Ronaldo as spectacle, Mr. Nobody as manipulation, and Brian as emotional catalyst, then the final act is not about who wins. It is about who finally sees the whole board, and if Dom sees it too late,
then this saga does not end with a victory lap. It ends with a choice no one is ready for, because the most dangerous betrayal is not the one planned in secret. It is the one that happens without the person even realizing they are part of it. What if someone in the family has been feeding information for years without knowing it? Not intentionally, not maliciously,
but strategically placed in situations where their choices were predictable. Nobody has always played long games.
And long games require pieces, and the most effective piece is the one that believes it is free. So imagine this. One member of the team constantly ends up at the center of key missions, always surviving, always escaping at the exact moment things collapse, always unknowingly pushing Dom toward escalation instead of resolution. At first it looks like luck, then it looks like coincidence,
then it starts to look like design. And if Mr. Nobody returns with data proving that patterns were never random,
that someone's movements were subtly redirected through manipulated intel, fake threats, controlled leaks,
then the betrayal is not about loyalty. It is about architecture.
Someone was built into the system as a trigger. Now raise the tension further.
Because what if that person discovers the truth before Dom does? What if they realize their entire history with the team was shaped, nudged, calculated, and now they are forced to decide whether to confess or to keep playing the role assigned to them? And here is where Brian's return becomes explosive. Because Brian represents instinct, and instinct notices shifts before logic does. What if Brian is the first to sense something is off?
What if he sees the hesitation?
What if he connects the pattern? Now,
Dom is caught between trust and doubt, between family and facts, between the man who once saved him and the system that might have saved him repeatedly for a reason, and then layer Ronaldo into this chaos.
Not just as spectacle, but as public pressure.
As a face tied to a larger global response that forces everything into the light. Secrets cannot survive exposure if the world is watching.
If operations go public, if Mr. Nobody's files leak,
then the family does not just face an enemy. They face revelation, and revelation forces a fracture. Because once Dom understands that someone close to him was unknowingly part of a larger design,
the real question is not who betrayed him. It is whether he can forgive a betrayal that was engineered. And this is where the saga can end differently than anyone expects, not with a race, Not with an explosion.
Not with a last-second save, but with a choice, Dom standing in front of the person who may have been used as a trigger.
Brian watching, knowing what this decision means.
Mr. Nobody silent, because this was always the outcome he anticipated. Does Dom break the cycle? Or does he prove that he was always predictable, because if he chooses wrong, then everything that defined Fast and Furious was never Freedom.it was designed. And if that realization lands in the final seconds of Fast 11, then the screen does not cut to victory.it, cuts to uncertainty. And we are left with one question burning in the dark. Was this ever Dom's story? Or was he just the engine?